Hi, this is Dr. Joannides, Chief Medical Director at Optimum Re. And this is our final video, video number 5 for the Cholesterol 101 Optimum Academy series on cholesterol risk factors. So let's get started. So we've talked about different kinds of lipoproteins. We have HDL, which is the good cholesterol. It's wrapped by ApoA. We have LDL, the bad cholesterol, which is wrapped by ApoB. And we have the really bad or ugly cholesterol, which is lipoprotein little a, which is an LDL molecule with Apo big B wrapped by Apo little a. So that's the worst of the worst in terms of lipoproteins. So when we talk about risk factors, typically we've used our total cholesterol levels, HDL level, pardon me, LDL, which is calculated, and cholesterol HDL ratios, as those are the typical measures that we see on a lab profile. Then we look at triglycerides as well. Now, of that, we're only measuring cholesterol, HDL, and the triglycerides. The LDL is actually a calculated number. So we've talked about this before on our prior videos. So that's what I have highlighted in the red box. However, when triglycerides are elevated, which may be part of a familial hyperlipidemia, the high levels of triglycerides above 400 complicate the picture because you can't calculate the LDL correctly. So that throws a monkey wrench into the situation, and we're unable to use our LDL calculation. So what some people have moved to, as I've mentioned in prior videos, is this non-HDL cholesterol. So it's total cholesterol minus HDL, and that gives us the non-HDL cholesterol. And Quest, when they report blood levels of cholesterol, they include that in their panel. However, Exam 1, which is part of Quest, still is not using non-HDL cholesterol yet, but we've asked them to add that to benefit us as we underwrite lipid abnormalities. So we know from our past experience using total cholesterol over HDL ratio, or LDL levels, we've used these for many years in the past and still are using them currently, but they may not be the best indicators of risk. There's also another lipoprotein that we've talked about in our prior videos called lipoprotein little a, or abbreviated LP little a in parentheses. And that's genetically driven. So people either have it or they don't based on their genes. And the treatments that we use for typically elevated LDL or bad cholesterol don't work on lipoprotein little a elevations. So this group, about 20% of the US population, has elevated lipoprotein little a levels. Either changing their diet or using statins or any of the other typical medications don't seem to have any advantage to treating elevated lipoprotein little a levels. And a lot of companies just ignore lipoprotein little a levels when they see that in an APS. In addition, what we're finding out now is that the number of small particles of lipoproteins in the blood may have an unfavorable effect. The more particles there are, the higher the risk. So a higher level of small particles is bad. So there's a lot of things going on under the surface that we haven't necessarily been aware of because we've just been paying attention to total cholesterol and total cholesterol HDL ratios, or LDL levels. So we've asked the labs to add non-HDL cholesterol, as I put here in red, to give us another indicator, especially when the LDL cannot be calculated, as to what the risk might be. So start looking for that. So you can help a help us. You can request this as well. Maybe the more people that request it, the sooner we get this added to our profile, and we can follow this as a measure in the future. You also may have seen things like this in an APS. So in terms of what are risk factors, the particle size may actually be a risk factor. And in this particular panel, you'll notice that the typical cholesterol values are normal, as are the lipoprotein B and the lipoprotein little a at the bottom, but the particle size are in the non-optimal levels. And so not only should we be considering ApoB and lipoprotein little a levels when we look at risk, but also the particle size. So keep an eye on that in the future as another indicator of risk in terms of the lipid profile. So as I've used the iceberg as kind of a symbol of my understanding of cholesterol previously, I barely understood the top part of the iceberg, but now I'm understanding as I work further into lipoproteins, what's the risk of all those things that we haven't paid any attention to in the past below the surface. And that includes the particle size and also the lipoprotein little a and the apolipoprotein B levels. So even though typically in the past we just use total cholesterol and total cholesterol HDL levels, which in this case, look pretty good in terms of the ratio. And sometimes we even give credit for that against build. You'll notice that in red, the lipoprotein little a is remarkably elevated in this case and probably adds to this person's lipid risk. So we need to start paying attention to these other indicators that we haven't noticed before. So also keep an eye on this particle size and the number of particles in the blood. And this also may be something that we pay more attention to in the future in terms of trying to predict atherosclerotic potential in certain people. So if we start thinking about non-HDL cholesterol for cardiovascular risk assessment, and that's total cholesterol minus HDL, that's the non-HDL cholesterol, it may be more accurate, more convenient because we don't have to worry about the calculated LDL. It may be more reliable as well. So start looking to that as an indicator for lipid risk when you look at a particular case. We've had these treatment modalities for some time. Statins are the first line therapy that we've used, followed by cholesterol absorption inhibitors, and then PCSK9 inhibitors as well, which I reviewed in prior videos. So those have been the typical ways we've treated elevated cholesterol to try to lower the risk. And so we see that in APSs, and the benefits that we've received from people being on these has been in terms of improved mortality in life insurance insured blocks, because statins have been so useful in helping to not only reduce bad cholesterol levels, but helping to increase the number of LDL receptors to remove more LDL from the system. Plus, statins have these other what we call pleiotropic effects, or beneficial effects, by lowering the level of inflammation caused by elevated cholesterol levels. So we've used statins, the decreased intestinal cholesterol uptake inhibitors, and PCSK9 inhibitors, all to our benefit to try to decrease the amount of LDL or bad cholesterol and limit the risk of those factors. And just recently, although in the past we haven't had anything that worked on elevated lipoprotein little a levels, which are genetically determined, there's a new drug reported in Nature in 2024, which suggests that this drug may help lower lipoprotein little a levels without side effects. And so there's a big trial going on called the Kraken trial. which Eli Lilly is conducting. And hopefully that will provide us benefit for those people that in the past who had elevated lipoprotein a levels and had no alternative for treatment because nothing else seemed to work, and lowering their or changing their diet with lower fat levels did not seem to affect the lipoprotein a levels either. This drug may provide some benefit that wasn't available before. So we'll look forward to the results of that trial. So that completes our videos on Cholesterol 101. Thanks for attending.